My first question about this documentary, what did it feel like when you were approached to do this project? What was your first impulse?
Well, my first impulse, it was sort of like, no, because so many people had approached me before and wanted it to be very Freddy centric.
Ah.
And there are so many great documentaries and footage and the making of and great journalistic articles about Freddy, even academic papers. I didn't really have that much to say. And the problem is, I've said it so many times, it doesn't feel fresh. I feel like I'm lying when I talk about Freddy, but I have to repeat myself because that's the truth. And these guys, Gary Smart and Chris Griffins, at Cult Screenings in the UK, I talked to them about an hour, and it was like these guys. It was like I'd known them all my life. They're like sort of like fanboys, like I am, but they're fanboys not just for genre. They're real smart guys, and they like movies, all movies, and the new streaming and stuff. And they're sort of like having your own personal IMDb guys, with you, my own international movie database. And every time, I blanked or had a brain fart on some character actor's name, somebody from Hammer Films that I loved, they'd go, you mean Herbert Lom? And I go, yes, Herbert Lom, the Pink Panther, of course, Herbert Lom. Or, they'd help me out with other names, American actors, even character actors like Strother Martin, Warren Oates, guys that I loved. So they really had my back, Josh, these guys, and when I was doing interviews, and I knew they could finish a sentence for me, and they could cut away, and they, if I got lost, what I like to digress, because I'm asked the same questions a lot. How long does it take to make up? I can't lie. So I like to tell a story about the makeup or digress on that. Then I give the interviewer, the journalist, something fresh. And they kind of understood that, and they would let me digress. And then they would go out, and I had no idea what they were doing, but they would do animation, or they would go out and they would find people that I was talking about, colleagues of mine I hadn't seen in years, and get them to flesh out certain stories so that it was sort of like a story was getting more resonance, because they would seek out other people that had been part of that story. Mm-hmm. And so I realized they were doing that. And COVID hit in the middle of all this. I had a television series that I was hosting canceled. So I was dealing with all that, but we kept meeting, they'd come down to my house, or they'd come find me in London or somewhere in the UK if I was over there working, or Europe. And we pieced together some interviews, and they always had new questions and stuff. And they would find, photos that I'd never seen before. And I would show them photos that I had, and they would find old programs of plays that I had done and stuff. And then that would open up, and I'd have another story to tell there. Yeah. And it wasn't really a story about a famous actor or a great actor. It was a story about an actor that survived 50 years in Hollywood, mm-hmm. Ups and downs, parts I didn't get, parts that I still beat myself up for that I didn't get, mm-hmm. Parts I wanted, parts I didn't want, parts I thought were the most important thing in the world that turned out to mean nothing. And that's all part of an actor's survival. And they seem to understand that and let me, kind of, blab about that. And I think that's what makes it interesting. Not that I'm a special actor, but that I'm a survivor. Mm-hmm. And at this end of the survival, I do have a little bit of wisdom to impart.
Well, speaking of projects that maybe got away or didn't come to fruition, as a creator and as an actor, was there ever a project that stalled in development hell permanently that is still sore for you?
Well, I had worked with Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the middle of the 70s. And at the height of his stardom, he was supposed to do a movie called The Crusades for Paul Verhoeven. And Paul was also at the top of his game. And it was perhaps going to be the biggest movie ever made. I think my contract began with 6 months in Spain. And I was to play the balding monk that carries his weapons for him, you know, and tends his horse. And Arnold was to be this knight of the Crusades. I was his valet. And I was this old dirty monk with straw in my hair, you know, and my head shaved in the middle, kind of a Klaus Kinski role. And I was really looking forward to that as an adventure, you know, 6 months in Spain with Arnold.
Wow.
Doing a medieval
Hey,
project.
there's still time.
And they never got the financing. It was just too expensive. They couldn't get it below I think it was 125 million or something at the time.
Whoa.
So there's been several like that. There was one with Gene Hackman that I kept going back for, called March or Die, about the French Foreign Legion. I didn't get the role, and the movie never did any business. But I mean, the opportunity to work with Gene Hackman, you know, one of my idols, and, you know, weird stuff. I remember the original Kojak. There was a role of an Irish street kid who was like a stoolie to Kojak. He was sort of a Kojak street informer. And I went back for that a half a dozen times and screen tested. I think it evolved into the character of a young cop that Kojak worked with, but it started out as a street kid, an Irish street kid. I mean, who would I be if that would have gone? And I think I was up for several roles, or, you know, one of the leads and several other roles in Dukes of Hazzard. So strange, you know.
Yeah.
And that never happened, you know. But there were parts like that over the years. The Last Detail, I had a lot of callbacks for that, and that was such a great book. And Randy Quaid was brilliant in that. Don't get me wrong. But it's just, when you're a young actor, those parts are so important to you, and they seem so significant. Now, some of those don't mean anything any longer. You know, some of those parts.
Yeah.
Some of them never happened. Some of them were never made.
Was there ever?
And some of them were made and nobody saw them. But at the time,
Yeah.
you know, you're losing sleep. You're punishing yourself. You're second guessing yourself. But that's all part of the ups and downs of an actor's career. And, you know, you hear stories, you think I've been through that. Well, huge actors turned down Indiana Jones and turned down other roles and were up for other parts, major roles. And you years later, you hear about this, you know.
Yeah.
I can tell you actors I've taken parts away from, huge actors, better than I am, much better than I am, who I hurt their career. Literally, it's not my plan to do that. But, you know, I took 2 starring roles away from them. And this was an actor that I idolized, and he sort of disappeared. But so you never know. You just never know what, you know, but this is all part of the wisdom that you gain as you go along in your 30s, and then you're in your 40s, then your 50s and your 60s. Here I am, 76. And, you know, I have a movie coming out. I'm going to go see it next month up on Sunset Strip in a screening room, directed by my old colleague, my Phantom of the Opera director, Dwight Little, wonderfully talented guy. Danielle Harris, starring my old friend Danielle Harris.
It's amazing.
Yeah, we go way back. Danielle and I go back with Danielle when she was a kid, you know, and so it's you know, I've got other projects coming up at the end of the year. I'm still here, and and it's just, you know, I look at Hollywood Dreams and Nightmares as not being a movie about me, but being a movie about this guy, Robert Englund, who just happens to be this character actor that survived, and how over time those experiences add up to a life just as interesting as any of the films he did, if not more interesting, you know.
Definitely. My last question for you, which is a little related to what we just discussed, is within the world of the Nightmare franchise, was there ever a project that didn't come to light that you really wish had?
Well, I didn't get to direct a film because I was so big as the star of Nightmare on Elm Street. And it was I'm really good in comedy. I did almost exclusively comedy in the theater. And I've starred in a television series that was comedy, two of them.
Mhm.
V, which I was the comedy relief, and Downtown with Mariska Hargitay and Blair Underwood. And they actually said, I think the people at J. Arthur Rank said, oh no, we can't have the guy that plays that monster direct a romantic comedy. And that really hurt me for a minute, because it was a project that I'd lived with so long that I really understood. It's not to say that somebody else couldn't direct it better, but I just really sort of had it, in my head. But no, Freddie never cost me any acting jobs that I know of, and probably I've had to turn down several, because they were too similar to Freddie.
Mhm.
Probably a half a dozen horror movies that were trying to rip off Freddie too much. I've even done some horror movies that I'm really happy with, but they tried to exploit Freddie in the poster, and that disappointed me. But no, it's look at hey fiddly dee, an actor's life for me, as the wolf says in Pinocchio. I put on other people's clothes, and I say other people's words, and they pay me for it. And let me tell you, it beats working.
I bet. Well, congratulations on the doc. It's great, and I can't wait to see what you're up to next.
All right, check out Natty Knox, directed by Dwight Little, starring Danielle Harris.
100%.